Everyone, welcome again to our webinar today on supervising with neurodiversity in mind, hosted by Futures Without Violence and a project of Futures Without Violence, which is the Supporting Organizational Sustainability Project. My name is Abby. I am a program manager for SOS, and I will be one of a few hosts for today. I just want to start out by giving a huge thank you to our interpreters for today and also to the rest of our SOS team for all of the work that really goes into making sure that today runs smoothly. If you are having any issues with accessing interpretation or other tech aspects of the webinar, you can message all hosts and panelists in the chat box by just clicking on the two, and then there should be a menu that lets you say to either everyone or hosts and panelists. So if you are having any issues, please let us know and we will do our best to help you fix it. This is a webinar, so you will not be able to unmute and share today, but we do really encourage you to share in the chat as we go through. We would love to hear your thoughts, your experiences, and your questions. If you do have a question, though, for our presenter, if you could please use the Q&A function, and then we will do our best to be able to get to as many questions as we can at the end. I do want to note too that many of you shared some of your questions and challenges in the registration. And so we have incorporated many of those into the content for today, as well as a scenario that we'll have a little bit later on. One other way that you can participate is by using the reactions button. So if you are on a desktop, you should see the option with a little heart that says react. You can click that and choose a heart icon, clapping, thumbs up, laughing, and I encourage you to use that throughout the webinar if our presenter shares anything that resonates with you, or if you otherwise just want to help us feel a little bit more of what you're experiencing on the other side of your computer or phone. So we can go to the next slide. So real quick, let's practice using that reaction button by reacting with an emoji of your choice if you have ever attended an SOS event before, or maybe if you've just used one of our resources. So I see some thumbs up, some laughter, some celebration coming through. Great, it seems like quite a few of you. So if you are not familiar with the SOS Institute, our primary goal is really to support the infrastructure and capacity building of organizations to improve their knowledge and maintain their sustainability. So what that means is that much of our work falls under reflective leadership development, organizational resiliency, and resourcing our core values as a movement so that we can build a stronger and more supportive organizational culture. Through the SOS project, we offer technical assistance. So say something comes up today and you feel like you need additional support around it, you can reach out to us for additional resources. We have an annual virtual leadership cohort that actually just got started last week, as well as an upcoming in-person leadership development cohort that we call ACT. And then we also offer periodic webinars and national workshops. So we're really happy to have you all here with us today. And we'll share, let's see, in the chat a little bit in just a moment where you can access our website and any additional resources. We can go ahead to the next slide. So this webinar today is planned for the next hour and 15 minutes. We are recording and we will be sharing the slides. So, if you like to take notes, please feel free to do that. But just know that we will share that recording and these slides with you. If you need to, please feel free to go get your water, your coffee, get some lunch or a snack. I know in Pacific time where I'm based, it is exactly lunchtime for me right now. So please do what you need to do to be able to be present. Maybe that's taking a bit of a stretch too, or grabbing something to write with. We also want to note that some of you might might choose to share some of your personal experiences in the chat. And I just want you to be mindful to please remove any names or identifying information if you choose to do that. This is a national webinar, and so we really can't guarantee confidentiality. We do want to work through those scenarios and challenges with you, but just please remove anything that could be identifying of individuals or point towards a specific person. And if you haven't already, I see quite a few of you already have. Just share your name, your role, and your location in the chat. It's really nice to see how many different places people are logging in from, and maybe you'll find that there's a couple of people that you've crossed paths with in the past. Okay, and we can go to the next slide. So we're really excited to start this conversation today about supervising with neurodiversity in mind. We've had so many requests over the past, I don't know how long, at least a year, but probably longer than that. And I've personally been seeing more and more resources popping up around this that cover varying aspects of this topic. And it never really feels like quite enough. And I assume that today probably won't either, but we're just excited to be able to start the conversation with you and begin to build out this body of work. And so, as a result of today, we do really hope that you walk away feeling more able to consider ways to be supportive of neurodiverse staff, whether that's somebody that you supervise or maybe somebody who is in a leadership position within your organization. Uh, we also would like you to be able to explore strategies for conducting effective one-on-one meetings, delivering constructive feedback, and balancing accountability while meeting individual needs. And I think you'll notice much of this goes beyond just people who are neurodiverse and goes into just generally best practices. And then we also hope that you will be better able to navigate supervisory challenges and difficult conversations with clarity, empathy, and fairness. And we can go to the next slide. So without further ado, just want to hand it over to our presenter for today, Kathy Cave. We're so excited to have her. Every single time she comes and presents for us, I learn something new. And so, yeah, I'm just going to hand it over to you, Kathy.
Thank you so much. Welcome, everyone. I'm so excited to spend the afternoon with you and to be thinking about what are the things that come up that are challenges for folks who experience neurodiversity, and what does that mean for supervisory processes? So this is a space I love to hang out in, topics I love to talk about and think about, and hopefully will challenge some of us to think differently in terms of what we can do in our day-to-day with everyone in our supervisory approaches that really honors the idea that you don't always know, you may hardly ever know what people's learning styles are, what works best for them, unless you're having the conversation and having that conversation in consistent ways. And so to get us started, just about myself a little bit. I would say that I have been working as a consultant at the National Center on Domestic Violence, Trauma, and Mental Health this will be my 13th year in this particular space. And then for decades, I've worked in mental health, worked in foster care, worked in a number of settings where neurodiversity is the norm. And so what I would say is that if we can embrace that diversity, if we can acknowledge that we don't all learn and perform in the exact same ways, that there's room for creativity, there's room for individual growth and learning, that when we can embrace that, we are a stronger organization. Our programs are really working in different ways and functioning at different levels, and really strengthening our capacities to show up for the communities we serve and support in those different ways as well. And so neurodiversity can be an organizational superpower if we're here and ready to embrace it. Next slide, please. So Neurodiversity really at its core is naming that people learn differently, function differently, and that it also means that there's been a lot of assumption about what the norm is. So we end up in these divided camps sometimes around what's neurotypical, what's neurodivergent, and that often these ideas are at odds. And again, when we can embrace that folks are different and embrace that every one of us has something different that we bring and not being afraid of that difference, then we have, we're partway down the road in terms of how we can show up for one another in different ways. I will focus on supervisory processes today because that's my favorite place to hang out and to really think about when we have different learners and when we have ways that people perform differently, when everyone's best may look a little bit different, it's important for in our supervisory roles to be super clear about expectations and super clear about the ways we move forward and what's helpful. When we're kind of stuck in this place where we're at odds, there can be this, the way someone else's style shows up and plays out feels like it's in my way. And so people can definitely get into that rather than thinking about the and thinking about collaboration and thinking about the best ways that we all work. People can get into thinking it's us versus them, whoever the us and them are. And one of the challenges is that we don't know what that is, right? We don't know exactly who would define themselves as neurodivergent. It's not a requirement that someone needs to disclose. It also isn't just one thing. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide, please. And so what are we talking about here? That there are natural differences in the ways that individuals learn and function. And the idea of neurodivergence, has come up more recently, I would say in the last few years, with kind of getting at what are the challenges and why do staff struggle? What is going on underneath, right? And it's so important to know that these are not new ideas, that for decades we've known about learning differences and performance differences. People are not broken, they're not wrong, and they're not bad. And so to really underscore that, to just put an exclamation point on it, difference is not necessarily problematic. Difference just means we've got to figure out the best ways forward and figure out how to build capacity for each of us to be able to do our best work. And at the same time, difference does not mean that we have permission for some folks not to do the work that we're hired to do. So, what I mean by that is when I was looking at some of the challenges that folks had mentioned in the registration process and like what are the things that are getting in the way, what actually presents the challenges. And a large part of that was really about accommodations and how to fairly distribute accommodations and what if someone's taking advantage of an accommodation. And so what I would like to say from the start is if that folks could keep in mind that accommodations are not about preventing people from doing parts of the work. Accommodations are really about how do we support each person to bring their best skills to the work that they are hired to do. And I think that balance of accommodation and accountability is how do we best do the work? How do we best adapt? And that doesn't mean we, get rid of expectations. And so folks could kind of think about that and think about how that might show up in your work. So we both need to appreciate the natural differences in the ways that we communicate, we learn, we process information, we communicate both what are we hearing and taking in, and also how are we communicating our thoughts and feelings out. That all of this is in the mix for the ways that neurodiversity can be encouraged and embraced, and shining lights on all the things that we can as we're learning about each other. And then thinking about how do we not have neurodiversity be the challenge. And in part, I wanted to think about that on the front end of this conversation, because are some folks who would absolutely believe that there's no such thing as an environment where there's no neurodiversity. Like diversity is how we live, it's how we grow, it's how we learn, and it's embedded in all the things that we do. So there is no neurotypical, as some folks would say, that there's no such thing. There are just ways that we've gotten comfortable and guardrails that we've maintained. And some of that is beneficial for some folks at some points in time. And others would say it's really not helpful to have such rigid guardrails that we can't think. So somewhere in the views are the balance of how do we bring our best selves to the work we need to do and balance accommodation and accountability. So I wanted to pause there to see if there was anything in the chat that we needed to shine a light on for a moment.
This is Abby. I think we're good to keep going for now.
Great, thank you so much. All right, thank you for the next slide. So what is neurodiversity? There's such a wide variety of experiences that these are just some of the examples. And so typically things that get named are around autism spectrum disorders and the ways that people's lives are impacted when that's part of the experience. That we've had lots of conversation around attention deficit disorders, some with hyperactivity and some with inattentive types. It is not my purpose here today, or my intention, to define all the ways that people can show up as different. That in my heart, I believe there's a uniqueness for all of us, and that no two people experience, for example, dyslexia in the exact same way. It might be a learning difference. It might be something folks are struggling with, but that how people struggle and the impacts on individuals is different. So as we start to think about some of the other things that might come up, challenges around mental health, challenges with intellectual disabilities, the ways that folks are experiencing certain kinds of medications may also have a role to play in how people are showing up and the way that communication is impacted. So when we think about all of these potentials, and then there's so many more, there's also combinations of more than one source of a challenge. So I may be someone who experiences both sensory processing difficulties and other kinds of mental health challenges and be really, really good at my job. So as we think about the differences, it's really, I think, a matter of how can we be curious that when staff are impacted by something and not bringing their best selves, not showing up as their best selves in the work that they're here to do, wondering and being curious, I wonder what is underneath. And the best way to have that conversation is directly with staff. As a supervisor, for me to actually say, I noticed this. Is this something that you struggle with? How does this impact your work? What are the ways that you can be supported while you do the work? And so language matters, and being really open and thoughtful and clear about, as a supervisor, it does not come to me as my first instinct to say, what work can I take away from you? Or what work can we take off your plate? I want to start from a place of what's happening, what are the impacts, and are there ways that you can be supported to do your best self, to be your best self, to really bring all the best of what you do to the work that you're doing. And so, again, wanting to pause and see if there's anything in the chat that might be useful for sharing before we move forward.
This is Abby. Kathy, yeah, I think you just touched on this a little bit, but maybe it would be helpful to provide a distinction of, today we're really not getting into HR processes or the Americans with Disabilities Act and how, we're framing this instead around supervisory relationships and staff, because there's just a couple questions around that in the chat.
Thank you. Um, I will mention it actually just to say that there are there's a lot of responsibility on organizations. Actually, if you could go to the next slide, please, and I'll talk about these things together, right? That in our organizations, we have challenges related to what is policy, what is law, what is practice, what's effective practice. And so, as I am not an attorney, I am not going to speak to laws around that. I'm also not here representing HR professionals, but I will say that HR is your friend. That anytime in your organization, any one of us, whether you're someone who's being supervised by other people or you are a supervisor yourself, to really talk with human resources around what's coming up for you in the work and what is possible in terms of accommodations. What is good practice? What is it that law actually says? As supervisors, we need to be aware of what those distinctions are in our organizations, because every organization, every program does not have the same HR policy and practice. So, what's in alignment with good practice? What is for human resource professionals to be mindful of in terms of what do our internal policies say? Are the policies we have in alignment with the Americans with Disabilities Act? Like, all of those things are really powerful conversations. And as supervisors, we need to be aware in our program, what's our practice? What are our values? What does our personnel or policy manual actually say about accommodations? And so that work is for another day, another conversation, but I encourage everyone to take that deeper dive and really understanding the Americans with Disabilities Act as it applies to the work we do and as it applies to hiring practice. In thinking about other organizational challenges, one of the things that comes up is that whatever the general approach is, so if I'm as a supervisor, I'm pretty clear most of the time. I'm understand what the workload is. I'm supportive and try to help staff figure out the best ways to manage the workload that they have. That I think pretty often and pretty clearly about how our values align with the way we actually behave at work. And all of that, I'm assuming, is pretty effective. Of course, the problem with assuming is what it is, that it's not until someone struggles, and sometimes many people will struggle before it actually becomes clear that the challenges may be related to, yeah, most of the folks are understanding what I'm saying and doing, but those who are not, what is the barrier or challenge? And we often don't stop long enough to say and to ask and to understand Where are the barriers and what can we do about them? A lot of our challenges may be based in organization and how we approach organization. I had an experience this week where I had made some piles in my office to the point where things were cluttered and I couldn't see the top of my desk. And I was having a hard time thinking clearly about the things I was trying to work on. And so it wasn't until I moved the piles, filed them away, got stuff clear so that I could think more clearly. So I know myself well enough that that's a thing for me, that when there's a lot of clutter, it's really hard for me to manage my day to day stuff. It doesn't often spill over into my work, but sometimes it can. And so the challenge we have in our programs is that we often assume that what we're communicating, we are doing well enough. And it's not until people struggle that a supervisor might know that there's something that is happening, that or someone is not experiencing the same thing in terms of clarity and direction and understanding and communicating and learning and growing. And that those disconnections can be really disruptive to our work with communities we care about. It can be disruptive to working together in teams. It can be disruptive to people really feeling good about the work they do. So when there's issues that interrupt communicating and processing, and it's different than what I know or what I'm used to experiencing, I may miss that as a supervisor. So when we think about how many people in any workplace are what is typically known as neurotypical, what percentage would you say? Add in the chat what you think.
This is Abby. I'm seeing a bit all across the board. There's some 70%, 50%, quite a few folks who went lower with 10, 20, 15, other folks who went higher to 80%.
Yeah, thank you so much. And the reality is, we have no idea. We really have no idea. And that how important it is for our supervisory relationships to be built as relationships, to really understand and have conversation about how people are learning and growing and making that part of what we typically do in supervision. Because what is useful, typical, I would say normal in like big air quotes, as there's no such thing. And then we forget that there's no such thing as normal, right? That there's how are we showing up? How effective are we being? Looks different person to person. And as I shared earlier, there are folks who will say that there are zero neurotypical folks in our workplaces. And so somewhere in the middle is more, it's more important to identify what's working for us, what's not working for us, where can we learn and grow, how can we try new things, how do we stay creative in the way we engage with one another. And I know that that's more challenging when people are feeling stressed. I also want us to think for a moment about differences in brain functioning. And those differences do not mean that people aren't capable of doing the things they've been hired to do. And at the same time, there can be a mismatch between what people's best skills are, what people's best approaches are, what people's openness is to learning, and the job that we are currently hired to do. And so there are lots of misunderstandings around those disconnections. When we disconnect, when we have disconnections, what fuels them? Where do they come from? What is it that we can work together collaboratively to change, and where the challenges are bigger than what we know how to navigate. And I think that's what people worry about, that we worry about causing harm to one another. And I appreciate that immensely. We worry about, is feedback too harsh? We worry about whether or not someone having just another chance is the answer. We worry about, is it okay to have conversations when something's not a good fit? How can we talk about that to see, is there an opportunity for a better fit? And sometimes there is, sometimes there isn't. And so all of this in the mix creates some worry, creates some anxiety, creates, you know, just sometimes, like right at the core, creates some mistrust between supervisors and team members. And it also can create some a sense of urgency around having an answer. Like, we need to know now. We need to know what to do. We need to know what our limits are. We need to know what our expectations are. And so, because we do need to know, and there are some things that we have laws about, there are things that we want to make sure that we are acting in line with our own personnel policies. So much of the time, we don't look at those policies until something has happened that's upsetting. And so, figuring out collaboratively together, how do we move forward? What do we do? What are the conversations we need to have? And again, I encourage people, look at your policies, don't wait until there's a crisis, and talk to HR. That those are folks who are aware of what our personnel policies say, or at least that is an expectation, that they would be folks who would know around, what are the policies are, what are they, but also how are they being interpreted. Also, things change over time. And so a policy that was in place, for 7 years ago or 2 years ago, because of the speed of technology, might need to be looked at again today. And so, to not be rigid, to stay open, flexible, and creative. Next slide, please. One of the things that I wanted us to also be thinking about is our own comfort level with talking with human resources, with having honest conversation, being able to give both appreciative and critical feedback when we need to have those conversations. And so, the way that we get more comfortable with all of those things is practice. And often what we do instead is we shy away from those conversations. So, because we don't want to cause harm, or we get concerned about being in conflict with others or having disagreements with others. And so, for many of us, the challenge is in, how are we having relationships that are supervisory in general? How are we having relationships where we can be truth tellers and giving that appreciative feedback when we witness something that has been incredibly helpful, but also being able to name that I'm not comfortable with something, or I feel overwhelmed by something. This challenge that's in front of me right now, and I think it might be related to a learning style that is not working well for the expectations of the role someone might be in, being able to say we're uncomfortable. And so, I just wanted to share some information. When people talked about how confident they felt addressing neurodiversity, and from a supervisory perspective. And some folks, about 43.7%, said, I'm somewhat confident with this. 34.5% said, I feel kind of neutral about this. 12.8% were somewhat confident. 7.3% were very confident. And then 1.7% said very unconfident. So we have quite a range of folks and quite a lot of folks who are uncomfortable about the idea of addressing learning differences in the supervisory process. And so I would like to say that coaching can help with that. So when we as supervisors, and I'm curious as to the number of people, the percentage of this group who are actually supervising folks right now, that when we think about that, like what does it look like for you in terms of your own confidence and comfort with addressing differences in how people approach work, the differences in how people approach their lives in general in terms of communication, and just really big style differences. You know, I spend a lot of my work and non-work time with people who learn and function very differently than I do. And I have to say, they have been my greatest teachers when I've been open to learning. And so when we think about not giving feedback, as an example, because we're hesitant to do so or hesitant to ask, when something didn't get done, what was missed, what got in the way of getting that done. Um, that because it's uncomfortable, and then folks who are having those kinds of challenges might also be misunderstood or not be great at communicating what's going on for them. Some folks in this work, in our work, never want to talk about a feeling. They don't express feelings. They don't expect to talk about their feelings at work. And then as supervisors, sometimes that's exactly what we're asking folks to do. So if I know that I'm meeting with someone and they're not comfortable talking about their feelings, when I want to process something or use reflection, what I'll say to them is, what came up for you? Because that gives people space to talk about it from their own perspective. So I'm wondering, what are the ways that we can, in our every day-to-day approaches to supervision, use more of a universal design approach, be able to talk about things that folks can respond in a way that is comfortable to them without having to explain every time, oh no, I'm not comfortable talking about my feelings, or feeling like they have to be super exposed in terms of the work that gets done. I like to talk about when a challenge comes up, what got in the way, and let folks tell me using their own words what got in the way. And I may have some ideas to offer, but a collaborative approach in supervision means really understanding that every person may be coming at their work or moving towards their work in their own unique way. So it doesn't mean it's a free for all and there's no rules and there's no guardrails and there's no way to do it. We have expectations, and we want to be clear that in how we communicate those expectations and how we share what's coming up. I wanted to just take a moment to see if there's anything that folks have put in the chat that they've noticed. And Abby, let me know if you're seeing anything there.
Yeah,
That any
this is Abby. We do have a question about if you are going to share just some ideas for ways that you can accommodate neurodiverse staff. And I think you've shared a couple, like
Mhm.
universal design, talking with everybody in a way where you are following up around, what's getting in the way for them.
Mhm.
And then we also just have some folks who are self-identifying as having ADHD or autism and ADHD and just some of the challenges that they face navigating their relationship with their supervisor.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of that. And it's hard because again, if you've got a one-way approach, to this is how I do things. As a supervisor, it gets really difficult to navigate that and to feel that difference is part of being human and that it's okay to have difference. Let's go to the next slide. And absolutely, yes, we have a few things to talk about. Okay. So, a lot of this we've talked about already, but thinking about inclusion, thinking about disability rights, ensuring that people have opportunities for staff engagement. Real, simple, clear. If we think about the ways that we have meetings, the ways that we deliver information, some folks, for example, when instructions or when new information is coming in, might be a new way of doing things, a new process, something else to think about, might be new funding, something is changing in our work. For many folks, it's easiest to one, hear that out loud. So in a staff meeting where everyone's hearing the same thing, so people can ask questions, people can gather information, but also think about what does this have to do with me? What does this have to do with my work? But to also think about that when someone else in a group can ask a question, I might have the same question, but just slower to get to the question in my head. I'm someone who likes to ponder things. So when I hear information in a group, that's really helpful because it gives me more to think about. When it also helps someone to have that information in writing, let's just do that. So a universal design example would be at a staff meeting, we have an agenda. Here's a handout or some written information about something new that we're getting ready to do. Having that in writing for folks, having everybody hear it at the same time, having everyone being able to hear each other's questions, and then also in a one-to-one supervision, following up. Just making that a habit in the way of communicating new information can be incredibly helpful to folks. When we look at things from a perspective of what are the most ways that we can help someone connect to information or to the way they're learning, to the way they're in relationship with the communities we serve, being able to talk about those things in a regular, consistent way is helpful. So if staff meetings are once a month and we have this more open, here's what we're talking about today, here's an agenda, here's some information about the things that we're going to talk about. We also have that in writing for folks. We are hearing it together so people can ponder. And then in my one-to-one supervision with my supervisor, I have an opportunity to follow up on what was discussed this week that I might have more questions about or might need additional information about. And so there are, again, really simple ways that we can be supportive of the ways that people learn differently. And the more we engage and give people the most opportunity for engagement, not just is it good enough, but what's the most opportunity for engagement, then we are together, feel that sense of belonging, and we have more creativity in our partnerships because people are more present for them. I'll pause there for just a second. Is there anything else for us to be thinking about?
This is Abby. We have a great question in the chat, but let me know if you want to save this for a little later.
Okay.
So, someone's asking or stating, one of the ways that ADHD and autism often present is a particularly strong sense of justice. This is one of the many ways that neurodiversity makes us stronger as people and as organizations, but it can also present a challenge when there is friction related to policy, procedure, and feedback. I'm wondering if others have tools and strategies around this specifically.
Oh, I love this question. I think it's amazing. One of the things that I would say is a strategy is to not immediately dismiss the person as, oh, they've always got an objection. And that's often what happens. So the person who is calling out that there's an injustice or feeling that something is not quite right or that someone is being either left out or left behind, it's can we have an environment where we are willing to learn and grow together? And when we have those learning kind of environments or learning, that learning from each other is like the focus of how we show up, right? There's always something new to learn, and we don't always see everything the same way. Means that we need to take the time to listen to what folks are saying and experience what they mean. And there's also let's check it against our values. Let's check it against what's our policy. And does our policy need to be revisited? And so rather than an automatic, no, that's such a headache, of what's being said, let's look into it. If the time for that conversation is not right now, for whatever reason, it's naming that. That's a good point that you're bringing up. Let's look into it some more. Let's gather some information and then let's come back and talk about it. Can that be an agenda item for our very next meeting? When people contribute to the conversation, contribute to the agenda setting, they absolutely have more opportunities for engagement as staff and feel respected as part of a team that functions together. Anything else related to that?
This is Abby. Someone's asking a follow-up question just around if there are any examples you have to help conceptualize what policies or protocols would look like around that.
Yeah, I think it's one saying that we value that we're a learning culture and that it's the practice of when there's something that's being brought up as an injustice or is this truly fair or questioning, it's the commitment to come back to it and talk about it. That are we'll have policies that are actually addressing things like there's a technology related one that just recently came up in my work around use of the Google glasses, that, there's technology built into the glasses. And whether the questioning was whether or not that was a safety risk. And so what the group decided to do was a program. They decided to let's do some research and come back to this. Let's think about it and talk about it. So they actually did. They went and got some advice. They reached out to technical assistance providers. They came back to talk about it. What they learned is that their current policy is in alignment with this current safety standards, but also acknowledged that as technology develops, we might have to come back to this in a different way. So it's keeping that door open for that conversation. And so all of this really is about how do we increase access to participation? How do we make sure that we avoid any disconnection? So because someone disagrees with a process or a policy doesn't mean they have to become disconnected from colleagues or the organization. It's a topic for discussion. Let's stay connected and keep talking about it. We need to make sure that as supervisors, we're advocating with staff when other folks are, feeling some kind of way about how we show up. It's, well, we're working on it. Let's talk about it, encouraging folks to have those kinds of conversations. And we need structures that actually work to increase participation. So that's if it needs to be in writing, put it in writing, put it in writing for everybody. If we need to talk about it, let's talk about it in large group and have other smaller group opportunities. Looking at all the ways that we can. And then be open to collaboration. It's really important. So let's go ahead to the next slide, please. A couple of things I want to just touch on is making sure that, again, that our skills, our values, and the ethics we practice are all in alignment. So if we are saying that we are about justice, then we need to be open to the things that we accept as just regular, it's okay, the way we do things is fine. We have to expect that there may be challenges about that they're not just fine. We have to make sure we meet people consistently and use one-on-one conversations in supervision for supporting people's growth, learning, and skill development. We want to notice and acknowledge strengths, but also set very clear expectations for the work. We've talked a lot about accountability in terms of the balance, but supervisors have to also be accountable to know what policies are, to know what practices are, and to model dignity and respect. Give feedback, use reflection, and to focus on overall well-being are all pieces of what we need to do together. Next slide, please. So to support staff who are neurodivergent, it's doing all the things that we've been talking about, but also to notice our tone matters and that we have to behave in a trustworthy way. So if my tone is sharp, that can undermine the words I'm using. So we need to make sure we have balance in those things, right? That I sound the way I intend to sound. And that means I'm checking in with the person even while we're talking, that, am I coming across in a clear way? And is there anything that is uncomfortable? So I don't speak to safety unless someone is like, there's physical safety and emotional safety, right? I talk about comfort in the supervisory relationship. And when someone says, I don't feel safe in my supervisory relationship, for me, that's an indicator that we need to involve human resources in those conversations. So we think about how we're coming across and checking in with the people we supervise in those moments, or even people that you're talking with. Is there anything that is a barrier right now? And checking in on what those barriers might be. If we don't talk about what people's strengths are, then all they hear from us is negativity. So we need to have conversations about what's going well, but also plans for how we are going to follow through with the work that needs to be done. So what does that mean? It's that we're actually asking, thinking, talking about the ways that if you have something new to do, or if you're behind on something in your work, we need to have a real conversation about what strategies will help this improve. Sometimes it's the relational parts of our work that are hard for folks. So it's talking about that, especially when folks are working in ways that don't keep the community members we serve in the driver's seat with decision making. Right? It's looking at what's in the way of me being more supportive rather than telling the folks that we work with, you should do this or you should do that. We often, when we get frustrated, we stop acting in survivor defined ways and we stop being flexible and expansive and open. We start to think that we have a better idea about what survivors should do. And so that same collaborative openness that we want to keep with the community we serve, we also want to be talking with staff in real clear ways. Here's the expectations for your job. Here's your job description. Here's the things that you seem to be struggling with. Let's take them one at a time and see if there's some strategies we can try. So it's not saying, as I said earlier, about how do we take away work. It's this is your work. What can we do to make it possible for you to do that? And then there are times when the person who may be struggling with a learning challenge or the way that they show up, whether that's about ADHD or depression or medication, whatever is contributing to those things, then how do we make sure that when it's leaders that are having those experiences, we have strategies for them as well? So I might need to be reminded if I'm coming across as very rigid and there's not space for flexibility. That might be what a bad day looks like for me. So we need to be able to give each other feedback. If I'm coming across and my tone feels harsh, staff and everyone around me needs to be able to give me that feedback to let me know that something needs to be different. Let's go ahead to the next slide.
This is Abby. Kathy, I just
Yeah,
want to give you a 15-minute heads up until we close out.
great. Thank you so, so much. So I mentioned consistently using the one-to-one meetings, but it's really helpful to build these meetings as a habit. We want to make sure that when I have a one-to-one with someone I supervise, we both contribute to the agenda. It's I have this, what do you have? Is there anything that's come up this week where we need to talk about it a little more, or that there's something was unclear, or was I unclear? It's that vulnerable kind of checking in with each other that helps us show up as consistent and trustworthy. So making sure that we're giving feedback where it's needed, and that if we're giving someone feedback, it's public praise, private criticism, always. That in our one-to-ones, we're looking at skill building and planning. I need to be comfortable as a supervisor, making it very clear when someone's skills or approach needs to be different. It's also important and on me as a supervisor to provide resources and supports. So exploring tools, having that openness around approaches that we can use, really thinking about strategies for success that, hey, I wonder if, and then making sure that we have ways of letting folks know. Again, difference doesn't mean it's wrong, but if it's outside of our policy or in conflict with our values, we need to talk about it as something that needs to change. Go ahead to the next slide, please. Accommodation. And folks had a lot of discomfort with the word accommodation. So I wanted to just spend a moment, like, really, yes, accommodations are adaptations so that we can do the work more efficiently, do it better, do more fully. To be in communication with folks where we talk about clearly when something needs to change. And I love the language of this is where we are, and then this is what needs to change. And that if we're collaborative with a lot of things and in many ways, we can also be collaborative about learning new skills, using technology, using organizing tools to figure out different ways to build staff success. So again, I don't start from a place of what can I take off your plate? That's not how this works for me. But it's really how do we work together so that this can work better. So as we're thinking about collaboration and approaches to change, what idea is good enough to try? Not and to be able to talk about needs for growth without shaming people, and we can acknowledge discomfort. So sometimes I've supervised folks where critical feedback is really painful for them. So it's not that I didn't give feedback. I started to talk about, I know this can be uncomfortable, so I'm gonna say it, and then we'll come back and we can talk about it. So let me just give the feedback, and then let's make sure we talk about what it means and where we go from here. So that those kinds of things and approaches are really helpful so that people can get more comfortable with hearing the word feedback without panic. And so when we're worried about causing harm and we don't want people to panic, one way we can work to build that comfort is to just say, a heads up, I'm going to give you some feedback about this. And then we're going to talk about it. And then we'll think about strategies and tools. To be really clear that it's not strategies or tools that are bad. It's shame that often gets in the way, fear gets in the way, and thinking that, oh no, I just got this feedback, so therefore I'm a terrible person. Let's go ahead to the next slide. We've got a few minutes that I want to just mention some technology. And so this particular website can be really helpful to folks. And where I got some of this information, but things that help with communication from talk to text can work for folks. Things that are helping to make the environment less chaotic. So while noise canceling headphones was one thing that was helpful, in one place of work, because one of the staff was wearing headphones, other staff thought they didn't want to be bothered. And so then we had to explain and teach all staff the purpose of wearing the headphones. It's not to shut you out, it's to shut out distractions so work can get done. So ways you can be in touch with the person is to either, ask for some time to talk, to send them a text, send them an email, or gently, if you have to interrupt, just try to get in front of them so the person can see you and they're not shocked because they didn't hear you coming. So the other key piece, I think, is time management and folks really struggling. So there's some strategies for time management that have things like, if you have a task to do, is this urgent? Is it not urgent? In the not urgent, does it need to happen today, or does it need to happen this week? If folks have struggled prioritizing for themselves, another box that can be added are things like, what are things I avoid? So I tend to avoid long writing assignments. Even if they're not very long, it feels long. And so I have to do things to actually call my attention to the pieces of my work that I don't find comfortable. And that's the writing pieces. So that kind of thing can be really helpful. One of the handouts that you all have is questions that encourage problem solving. I like to use those questions, again, with all staff to engage people in being part of the solution and how important that is to have that experience as well. So it's not just, I'm going to fix this for you. It's a we. We are going to work together to figure out some strategies that may help. And if we try something and it doesn't work, we will try something else. We'll look at what gets in the way and we'll approach it differently. And when people know that they're not in that alone, because nobody needs to be alone when they're having a hard time or to do things alone that are really a struggle to do, let's find some strategies that we can be supportive of one another. Go ahead to the next slide, please. So I wanted to share a quick scenario. Avery supervises 6 staff, including Sam, who has worked in the program for 10 months. Initially, Sam seemed to be doing well with learning and carrying out advocacy responsibilities. Lately, Sam seems to be struggling with independent work, completing documentation, losing track of time, and meeting responsibilities to support survivors. When Avery offers critical feedback, Sam seems frustrated, but also wants to do better. And so I wanted to just put something concrete in front of us for thinking about all the things that we can do to be supportive of what's happening for both Avery and Sam in this situation. It's really looking at What are the ways that we can get comfortable with giving and receiving feedback? It's not taking feedback off the table. It's making sure that we both build our comfort with giving and receiving feedback. So that would be great for the two of them to practice and get comfortable with in their supervisory sessions. Another thing that we've talked about that they can begin to look at are what are some of the ways that technology might be helpful? Are there some learning opportunities that could be created for both of them? And so, really thinking about that, and I wanted to ask you all too, if you have anything that you'd like to add, to go ahead and put it in the chat if you have some suggestions for what would be helpful here. We've talked about co-creating agendas for one-on-one supervision. That would be useful here so that both feel their voices are heard, as an example.
This is Abby. In the chat, we have someone sharing that they find keeping an open dialogue and allowing the individual to be a part of the solution is very helpful because
Mm-hmm.
neurodivergent folks, themselves included, often know what would help the very best.
That's exactly right. That is exactly right. It's really important to engage the person whose challenge it is to be in the solution seeking. And I love that. So thank you for it.
And this is Abby. We have just a couple minutes left, but I feel like this is a good opportunity while people are thinking about what they might do to tack on some related questions from the Q&A, because they relate to this scenario. There's a couple people wondering about when it's appropriate to shift from supportive strategies to a formal coaching plan when you haven't really been able to resolve performance issues.
So I think coaching is always, like from the beginning, a strategy to use. And coaching involves both that support and direction. And so that's important, right, to carry through. I think what it sounds like you're looking for is like, when do we shift from being supportive to progressive discipline? And what I would say is when we are able to, right from the beginning, when something needs to change, give that critical feedback, then we have something that we're always talking about and working towards. So that feedback is really, really important, right? It's important to name that this is what is needing to change, and these are our strategies for working on it.
And this is Abby. There's some other great ideas being shared in the chat around just
Cool.
talking about what have you tried so far? What are other ideas? Talking with the staff person to get at the root of what has changed, thinking through if it's an executive functioning issue, talking about how you might use flexible hours, if there's a way to support them around feeling under or overstimulated, and where they might be able to move somewhere with lower lighting or to a quieter desk. And then some folks sharing maybe don't assume Sam's reasons for being frustrated, reflecting back an observable frustration to them, and then exploring where it's coming from. And yeah, I think if we can squeeze in one more question too, just to make the people happy, uh,
Uh-huh.
there's another
I love
question.
happy people.
Yeah. There's another question that I think could tack onto this too around, let's say that the reason why Sam is struggling right now is because they have some life things coming up outside of work that are starting
Mhm.
to negatively impact them. And the way they've been navigating that is by maybe staying up all night, binge watching TV, and then that's been, you know, impacting the way that they show up at work because then they're really tired. It increases their task avoidance. And so when you default as somebody who is more centered around, meeting them with empathy, grace, and support, how do you navigate it too when it's really some personal challenges that are then really showing up in the way that they're able to do their work?
I love that. And yay, right? So some of the things we have to think about is not everything is a work problem, right? And so there are times where life gets in the way of us being effective in what we do. Many of our programs have employee assistance programs, whereas a supervisor, I could recommend that it seems like there's some life stuff getting in the way here. Make a recommendation for a referral to the employee assistance program. Sometimes, if you don't have that as a resource, do you have who are being able to say to staff, this looks and feels bigger than work related stuff. What are your outside supports? Have you considered counseling? That may be useful to you. And so we can only make a recommendation. We certainly don't have formal authority to make somebody go to therapy, but to be able to think about as an offering, this is what we can send. This is what we can say. This is what we can apply. But also, when it's bigger than what we can do in the supervisory space, make the recommendation for people to have other outside supports. And so sometimes an outside support is a paid for coach if your organization has a policy for that. That might be helpful. But if not, it's continuing to meet and continuing to give clear feedback. If we need to put that feedback in writing, to please do it. The more clear we can be, the more direct we can be, and we can also be able to say, these are the things we have tried with work-related resources. This seems outside. And I think somebody put it in the chat that sometimes work isn't a good fit. And so let's not get caught up in, you know, holding back or not following through on naming that when it's true, right? We can be supportive, we can be kind. I've terminated employment for, I think, 4 people in the last 40 years, and 2 of them I helped find jobs. So it's, or 3 of them I helped find jobs. So it's like sometimes it's just not a good fit. But when we try everything and think about belonging, then we at least we've got a chance. And we think about inclusion, we've got a chance. But also don't give more than what your program can sustain. So if we can't have everybody on flexible hours, think about that before you put flexible hours as what's possible. Let's talk about it. Let's see what works.
This is
So,
Abby. So
yep,
sorry, Kathy, we
no,
ran
that's
right
okay.
up against and then over the
Yep,
time, but I just wanted to squeeze those last ones in and really
sure.
appreciate you.
Yes,
And
absolutely. And there's some summarizing slides. I would just encourage folks to look at them. And you can always reach me if you have questions. I did put my email in the chat early on. Um, so yeah, just let us know what would be helpful in terms of any follow-up questions or information.
great. Thank you so much, Kathy. It's always so great to have you. We could have used probably 3 hours today, but it just
We
means we
could.
have to, do a part two or continue the conversation at another point. And there's lots of appreciation for you.